People who cut off their family, what did they do to you? My cousin, still a 12-year-old child at this point, lost both her parents and the family had to help her sell her parental house. Long story short, one of my aunts secretly sold the house without telling anyone and kept a profit, $250,000 for herself. Everyone thought the house was still up for sale until the real estate agent informed my cousin's actual guardian, a different aunt, that my other aunt had sold the house and that he thought it was sketchy. Good news though, my aunt was sued, had to pay everything back, and the $250,000 was directly deposited into my cousin's bank account. My aunt received an additional $50,000 fine she had to pay my cousin and guardian aunt for emotional damage. We do not speak about this aunt anymore. For clarification, how it was even possible in the first place, it is complicated. Due to my late uncle's and aunt's will, my cousin had two guardians after her parents passed. One was her general guardian, Aunt X. My cousin would move into their family home, and that aunt was made responsible for her school, her therapy, sports, social life, etc. The other guardian was married to my uncle, my evil aunt, her husband. He was very good with finances, so he made my cousin her financial guardian. Because my late uncle and aunt didn't want to take advantage of my cousin in case of becoming an orphan, so two guardians they trusted would make it safe. So, my evil aunt and her evil husband had access to all documents, keys, accounts, like my Aunt X. They had secret house viewings, found a buyer, had the new buyer sign forged papers. My evil aunt forged Aunt X her signature, had the new buyers deposit the money directly to their bank account, gave the new buyers the green light to move in, went to the real estate agents and said, "We don't need you anymore. You already sold it. And here you see Aunt X signed as well." That is where the real estate agent thought it was sketchy and thought to call Aunt X to thank her for the collaboration and wish her well now that it is sold. Mind you, the new buyers of the house were also victims here, but they were given their money back and bought the house back via the correct way. My evil aunt said she needed some money and her husband was good with finances, so they could borrow the money, whilst my uncle would borrow the rest of the money, turn it into stock, and make profit to pay the borrowed money back. So the judge asked how much profit they intended to make before telling anyone about their scheme. Well, if you think making $50,000 in profit was worth stealing and lying to a 12-year-old orphan niece of yours, that is what you will pay her in extra. They never actually made any profit due to the short time period, but the family took over his investment plan, secured part of my cousin's inheritance, and used a smaller part of her inheritance to invest so that my cousin could have extra passive income for the rest of her life. They didn't go to jail because the entire family requested they don't go to jail. The evil aunt and uncle had two small children at the time, so having 3 orphan children in the time frame of less than half a year would have been a punishment for everyone involved. Also, this was early 2000s, in a country that doesn't put people as easily into jail for civil cases as the US does. Though my family doesn't like holding grudges, we do not actively hate them. They were in fact having financial struggles, in secret, due to something unfortunate happening with them, so everyone understood but felt betrayed in the end. My family only wanted my cousin to be or stay supported, and making other cousins to become orphans wasn't an option. Excommunicating them from our family was their way of taking the high road. Did she just casually try to steal $250,000 from a 12-year-old? Story 2. My mother used to roughen me on a daily basis, lashed out for no reason than me being a child, woke me up in the middle of the night to give me cold showers because I did something she judged to be out of line. It was really BS reasons most of the time. Put my face in garbage because I forgot to tie the garbage bag before putting in the bin. Mind you, I was still a child. She always did this when no one was home, and I was so afraid to say anything that my sister and dad didn't know it was happening, until I told them a few years ago. I'm 29 now, with BPD, PTSD, and anxiety because of all this. I'm still struggling with all the emotions I experienced during my childhood. To this day, she still doesn't understand why I don't want anything to do with her. She still calls my sister to get her to convince me to get in contact with her. My sister hasn't nagged me with this since she found out what happened. Now I'm living with my girlfriend, who's the most wonderful and loving person ever. I'm glad I don't live in fear anymore. To the person suggesting therapy, don't worry. It's already going on and I have a psychiatrist. BPD is borderline personality disorder, and no, it's not genetic. Well, mostly. Mine was developed through repeated trauma. Story 3. I grew up in a family that looked perfect from the outside. 4 kids and parents as a solid unit. One thing we never talked about was Dad's explosive anger, which led to episodes that he would never apologize for. Just be nice later and we would all just brush it under the rug. Cut to my age of 31, and I'd been working with my father as a financial planner for 6 years, helping grow our client base. My mother and younger sister work with us as well as assistants. Only problem is, every 6 months to a year I'd get fired by my dad. Massive blow up in a screw you, I have everything and you have nothing. Get out and I'll never talk to you again. Then he would be nice in a day or two. Make some promises to put things in writing and we'd all just forget it. But you only want to bring up that contract so many times before you worry you would cause another episode. It would say things like, "You really think it would throw you? My daughter-in-law and grandkids out in the street?" It would think, no, of course not. It is what you threaten and I do get scared, but no, he wouldn't actually do that. Surprise, that's what happens. Business value almost triples. He tormented me until I lost 17 pounds, and I'm a skinny guy. I quit. Walk away with nothing. We end up hiring a company that works with family businesses for over $20,000 to help solve a family crisis. Specialists, psychologists, and lawyers are all involved. They write a report after interviewing every family member multiple times for hours and hours, including my siblings that don't work there. Report comes out, my dad loses his mind, fires the company that wrote the report. I make peace that it is all over. Start interviewing to just work at the bank. I've not been paid in almost 6 months. I have 2 daughters, 3 years old and a 1-year-old. But my dad comes back and starts making promises again, rehires the family business specialists. We have a meeting where I agree to not take the position at the bank after 3 successful interviews. I will manage the business while my father vacations for a month and he'll sell me my own clients. But I agree because I don't really want to work at the bank. My dad leaves on his trip. I think things are finally getting worked out, for the 10th time. But he comes back a month later and won't answer my calls. I go and see him in the office and bring my 1-year-old, who I haven't seen for 4 months. He says he's going to finalize the list of clients I am to buy. I haven't talked to my dad since. That was over 6 years ago. He ended up getting me fired from our investment dealer because I contacted his clients, even though he had either never met them or they were some of my best friends. Then he sued me. I had no money or any way to fight him, so I just abandoned everything and started over. I don't talk to my dad. Mom, brother, older sister, grandma, aunts, uncles, cousins, and many family friends. They all got my father's narrative. Patriarch said get out and everyone else just let it happen. Only my younger sister who worked there knows what happened and we're very close. We both just don't talk to our family. My wife and I are way better off and super happy. I made more money last year than I ever would have imagined and I'm my own boss. Story 4. I had a baby when I was 16. Because I was so young, I had to continue living with my parents along with a baby. When I turned 18, my parents encouraged me to go off to college and said they would look after the baby while I was gone and then I could have my child when I finished school. Of course, I visited my child all the time, but my parents and my sister started a smear campaign against me, stating that I was a terrible mother who abandoned her child. I knew things were being said, but I didn't realize it came from the people who were closest to me. I didn't really find out the level of cruelty until I finished school and wanted to resume care for my child. My parents got a lawyer and threatened to make my life hell if I didn't walk away. I was broke, young, and naive, so I walked away. It's one of the biggest regrets in my life, but I cut them off. I had to, for my own sanity. My child and I have a great relationship now. Despite everything my parents did and the lies they told to keep their grip on my child figured it out all on their own. They realized the truth. Story 5. My dad passed away the day before Father's Day. She who birthed me openly disregarded every one of his final wishes, up to and including the place of burial. Since then, I've gone full scorched earth. Never mind the years of physical, psychological, and financial mistreatment meted out to the both of us all our lives. I was prepared to forgive her up to that point. For him, no. She called my father weak for not making his wishes known to her, and stated that mental illnesses were a hoax, a crutch for the weak. I informed her right then and there that I was no longer her child, and she can rot in that miserable mausoleum she calls a house. I'm organizing a proper memorial service the way Dad wanted. I've also been making covert trips, taking everything of sentimental value from Dad's upstairs apartment when she hasn't been home, and I've opened a separate bank account, preparing for the day she passes. I have Dad exhumed and buried in the place he loved and wanted. I will make everything right that she has wronged. Mark my words. She's gone to me, and anyone who stands with her is an enemy. Story 6. My sister cut me off when I asked if she was engaged. Apparently, it was incredibly rude and I ruined her engagement. The reason I asked: her and her boyfriend were taking a big trip. We talked for months about the possibility that he would propose on the trip. 2 weeks before they left, he showed her the ring he bought her. On the trip, she posted a picture of a dinner and she had a big shiny diamond in her left ring finger. But I'm the schmuck for asking. I have no idea what the logic behind this is. My whole family can't figure it out. Let me give you some context. I have a social media account but never use it. Like, ever. Her and my brother were having a pretty heated debate. My husband asked a pretty neutral question, trying to clarify something she said. That wasn't a part of the conversation. She started insulting him, blocked him and blocked me, who wasn't part of the conversation, nor had ever been on it in years. But she still has my brother, who was the target of the heated debate. Story 7. I cut out my mother's side of the family. Her sister and brother made it their personal goal to financially ruin my parents. Then the other sister piled on. All three of them had been borrowing money from my grandparents for years, and when the other sister sold my grandparents' house out from under them, because they can't live on their own anymore, my grandparents were appalled and they were told by my aunt that she was putting them in a home. So they lived with my parents instead, and the other siblings accused my parents of taking their inheritance. They pestered, stalked, and vandalized my parents' property until both grandparents were gone. I will never forgive them, and hope their own children treat them as poorly as they treated my parents and grandparents. Wow, they really were evil and greedy people. Just saw their parents as a bank account. Story 8. I cut out my entire side of my mom's family after her funeral. I was 17. Her family had always been a difficult bunch. My mom had a stalker at the time of her passing. He claimed to the family he was her fiancé, and they believed him over me. Despite the restraining order and proof of cruelty, they chose that man over me. So I cut them out. Them only contributing a $100 donation to the funeral costs really helped that decision also. She had 3 birth siblings and 12 adopted siblings, several aunts and uncles and cousins, and they came up with $100. Screw that. And them. That was 8 years ago. Last I heard, her stalker spent Christmas with him, so my choice feels validated. Story 9. My uncle and aunt whom I lived with from the age of 15 to 19. They always treated me as an inconvenience, even though they're the ones who suggested I went to live with them. They had me clean up after them and their kids. They got mad at me when I ate too much of their food, causing me to have stunted growth, made fun of me for being depressed, and always discouraged me from doing any type of extracurricular activity at school because they didn't want me to make their kids seem like mediocre losers. They overshared family secrets with me and basically made me feel like I had to share those same resentments towards other people in my family in order to be welcomed into their home. To this day, I still have trust issues with everyone in my life. I rarely allow myself to make new friends. Story 10. I cut off everyone in my father's family after I came forward about him mistreating for years. My uncle suggested it was a bad dream, and my grandmother said it was normal for a man. That's not all he did, in the slightest. My auntie told me to go to the police so a mob wouldn't come to him. It then helped him leave the country to stay at her house with her 2 young daughters. But his father defended him and tried to convince my mother to meet my father in person. He would have hurt or ended her. No doubt in my mind. This man horrifically mistreated me and my family, only to be defended tooth and nail. It hurts, not seeing my little cousins, but if I'd rather go blind than ever have to see my father again. On the brighter side, since cutting him out of my life, I've moved in with my boyfriend, who I was dating in secret and helped me to come forward about what my father was doing. I've grown closer than ever with my mom and visit her as often as I can. And I've got a dog now. I was never allowed dogs, and now I have a beautiful border collie named Sky who I adore. I've never been happier. And even though I'm still very mentally unwell, I'm in a much better place. It really does get better. Story 11. I was born female. My mother wanted her sacred little boy and hated my dad. She cheated on him and eventually left him for my stepfather, taking me with her for no other purpose than to hurt him. She had her precious, perfect little boy a few months later. From that point forward, I, then 6 years old, was treated like nothing but an inconvenience in the best days. It was clear that I wasn't wanted and that my mother was doing everything in her power to keep me away from my father out of spite. She'd tell me I was so awful that he wanted nothing to do with me. I later found out that he kept looking, but every time he found out where I was, my mother and stepfather decided it was time to pick up and move. Unfortunately, I grew to resent him, and wanted nothing to do with him by the time I was old enough to make any form of decision about seeing him for myself. Fast forward. I had ear infections that were neglected to the point of hearing loss. I was put through enough physical and mental mistreatment that I wanted to pass away by the time I was 10. I was ordered to do anything my brother wanted to make him happy. They also liked to blow off steam by harming me whenever they were stressed or in a bad mood for whatever reason. CPS did nothing. My mother and stepfather would be warned before they came. They'd clean the house and warn me that I'd be given to an even worse family that would hate me even more and hurt me even more if I didn't act like a real little girl and tell CPS that it was all a lie, that I was happy, that I'd do anything to stay with my mommy and daddy. As soon as CPS left, I'd get for making them look bad and having CPS called in the first place. As an adult, I now have hearing aids. My mother has insulted me about them and the hearing loss itself, as if they're character flaws. She also would not allow a phone conversation to end unless I was crying, sometimes to the point of retching. My father passed away of cancer 10 years ago, but we were able to repair our relationship in the 6 years before he passed. My stepfather also passed away of cancer after he cheated on my mother, gave her Hep C and divorced her. My brother spent time in prison. My brother is still extremely violent. I cut contact with him 4 years ago after multiple threats to my safety, and sometimes my life, and him telling me repeatedly that I'm alive because he and his father were kind enough to allow me to live, and I should be kissing his feet in gratitude. A year ago, after 3 years of no contact, he sent me a message telling me that he wanted me to know he despises every aspect of me at a cellular level. My mother expected me to apologize for forcing him to feel that way. I told her I wanted no further contact with either of them. Any pestering would be reported to the authorities. Then I blocked both. I'm 40. This was a year ago. My only regret was that I allowed them to do this to me for so long. I let my mother especially torment me for 39 years that I can't get back. And over a decade of therapy did little to nothing to help me. I still occasionally have trouble even believing I'm a real person. It wasn't bad therapists. The mistreatment was just that bad. I moved 3,000 miles away almost 20 years ago, and it still wasn't far enough. If anyone is reading this and is still currently in the situation I was in, I only have to say this. Run now and do not look back. They won't get better. You don't deserve this. I don't want you to end up bitter and aged far beyond your years like I am. If I can't be a good example, I at least want to be a good warning. Every child deserves parents, but not all parents deserve children. Story 12. Not me, but my boyfriend cut off his whole family except his sister, and her status is pending. His mom was super prejudiced, and she threw a major tantrum when he took me to meet her and threw us out of the house. His dad, parents are divorced, told him a bunch of awful things over the phone about how he'd rather have my boyfriend be gone than be not straight. As soon as he hung up the phone, my boyfriend started crying, and that's been the last time he talked to his father. That's how bad it was. His sister is fine with us, but every time we see her, she's really weird and flirty with me. It makes both my boyfriend and I really uncomfortable, so he's asked her to stay away until she can handle herself. It's pretty messed up, but luckily they live in a different state. My family loves him, and have basically adopted him as their own. I think they like him more than me, lol. Overall, it's pretty tough, but he's working through it. If you're a parent, or one of your family members is part of the LGBTQ community, don't be a schmuck, please. Story 13. My dad passed away in 2004. He was 46 years old. Heart attack. He came home from work at 3:30 p.m. We were back from the hospital at 9 p.m. with him pronounced gone. I was 13. My brother was 15. I never loved my dad's family. I never looked forward to seeing them, and there always seemed to be no fun had with them at cookouts or parties. I'm sure the sudden passing had a lot to do with it, but after he passed, I became hyper-aware of how his family treated my mom, who's the strongest person I know. 2 examples. First, my dad's parents lived across the country, and instead of boarding their dog, made us delay the funeral by 2 days so they could drive. Apparently, boarding your dog for a while or being there for your grandsons was an easy choice to make. Second, an aunt of mine, while opening a check my family received at the funeral from my mom's lifelong best friend, remarked, "Wow, must be nice," in reference to the money we received to help us survive for a couple months. Got them off months later. It's been nearly 20 years, and it is one of the best decisions I ever made. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 14. I made the difficult decision to cut ties with my family. Years of toxic dynamics had taken their toll on my mental and emotional well-being. The constant criticism, emotional manipulation, and lack of support had stifled my growth and happiness. Despite my best efforts to mend the relationships and seek understanding, the toxicity persisted. It became clear that my own well-being could only be prioritized by breaking free from this unhealthy environment. With a heavy heart, I chose to sever those family ties. It wasn't out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I yearned for a brighter future, one filled with positivity, love, and genuine support. In the process of cutting off my family, I embarked on a journey of healing and self-discovery. I learned to set boundaries and rebuild my sense of self-worth. Chosen family and supportive friends became my pillars of strength, uplifting and encouraging me along the way. I realized that family is not solely defined by DNA, but by the bonds of love, understanding, and respect. By creating distance from those who brought harm, I embraced my own identity without the burden of seeking constant approval. Though the decision was difficult, it was necessary for my own happiness. I found solace in reclaiming my freedom and authenticity, and walked confidently into the unknown, knowing that I had made the right choice for my well-being. This journey became a testament to my resilience and the transformative power of self-love. I learned to forge my own path, free from toxic ties and embrace the potential for a brighter future. And so, I continue to embrace the possibilities that lie ahead, knowing that I'm creating a life filled with peace, growth, and the love I truly deserve. Story 15. Mom and Dad ended my dog. They live in a farm and begged for her because she was an Australian Shepherd and belonged in the farm. She was great and happy for a couple months. Fast forward another couple months. My wife and I haven't seen my parents for about a month, and in passing, they mentioned she had gotten sick but is doing great, that they took her to the vet and everything is fine now, and we would see them and the dog the following week when we went to the beach as a family. Approximately 2 days later, I see a picture of her in the background of one of their horses and she looks off. I call my parents and say, "What's going on?" They say, "She's not looking good, and we'll make it to the beach next weekend." So I get up, drive 3 hours, go get the dog. My wife takes her to the emergency vet that night while I stay with the kids. Found out my parents took her to the vet, told the vet it would be too expensive to treat her, $1,200. We ended up spending about $10,000. They were unable to save her in the end, but said if treated earlier it wouldn't have been a problem. My mom and dad tried to gaslight my wife and I, scolding us, saying it was our fault, partly as for letting them take her. Never asked to see how the dog is or even made it, and how they haven't tried contacting my children or I for the last 1.5 years. There's more to the story and everything, but I doubt anyone made it this far. Story 16. The nail in the coffin was the terrorizing of my wife and I's wedding planning. She reminded us on a regular basis that she wouldn't be coming to our wedding. Then one day before the shower, I decided she didn't want to miss it. I involved her in every aspect of the planning the second she wanted to be involved. She started fights with every single family member who had already been helping us the whole time, leading up to the wedding. She made my father cancel the favors we had picked out together for a better idea she had 2 weeks prior to the wedding. She made us come over 1 week before the wedding to help her finish making them. That night we helped her. She started an argument about how my grandfather, her dad, should get his own remembrance table because he was more active in our lives than my wife's grandfather. I stayed calm, reminded her this wasn't a competition. It was my wedding, and we were having pictures of all the loved ones who had passed on the table with a candle and a sweet note. She told my wife that she doesn't care about her side of the family and called her a witch. She ordered us to leave and told us she wouldn't be coming to the wedding. I refused to leave, pleaded with her to talk this out with us, so she called the police to have them remove us. My wife and I waited outside and spoke with the police. Once we got home, we received texts from her reiterating how she's not coming to the wedding. I begged for 3 days for us to talk things through, and she refused. My wife finally wrote a long, heartfelt message telling my mother she was officially uninvited from the wedding. We didn't hear a single word from her until the day of the wedding. She sent us texts 2 hours before the ceremony. Not one phone call, not one visit. We lived 10 minutes away. They were last-minute apologies that only came out because real consequences happened. I turned my phone off before the ceremony. My mother's Sundance was replaced with a DJ playing We Are Family and everybody coming to the dance floor to dance. The next morning, my sister went home from the wedding hotel early, since she had work. My mom greeted her coldly. She found my mom blue in her bed an hour later, around 9 a.m. she attempted to end it all. I got a phone call that morning from my sister frantically blaming me for mother's attempt. My life has only been in an upward trajectory since my wedding, and going no contact. I'm not going back. Story 17. My mother was living with her mom after I moved out of home for a few years. The opportunity came up for her to buy her own home. Grandma had given my mom her inheritance early to help with a deposit of the house. Long story short, as soon as Mom moved into her house, she abandoned Grandma. Doctor's appointments that were arranged, Mom just failed to show up to take her. Still not sure why she completely betrayed her, but at the same time she also blocked her sister. Mom has no interest in patching things up, and she seems to think she's owed the apology. There was a bank account set up where it required both Mom and my aunt's signature to remove the money, and multiple attempts have been made for Grandma to get the money so she can get new hearing aids, but Mom will not sign. I think what she's done is downright disgusting. I nearly disowned her during the heat of this. Story 18. I have two aunts who make everything about themselves. From family barbecues to other people's birthdays to funerals. Just don't have the energy for that. My grandmother has always been shallow, but after my grandpa passed away, she started pestering me about my weight. The last straw was when she told me it was a shame I couldn't have bothered losing weight for my wedding. I had done intermittent fasting for months and only lost 10 pounds due to the stress I was under, but regardless, her commentary about my wedding wasn't that I was happy or beautiful, but that I was fat. My sister has tried to end me or convince me to end myself in my entire life. She's ruined or tried to ruin every connection I have, whether it's family, friends, romantic interests, or teachers or professional connections. Tried to break up my marriage with the sole reason being that her boyfriend had broken up with her and she didn't want to be single and hurting. While her sister was, at the time, happily married. The boyfriend was and is a friend of mine, and she openly admitted to stalking him. And it got so bad that he had to change churches to avoid her. He moved to the other side of the state briefly. Story 19. On Thursday, 17th of October, 2019, my father and I traveled to visit my granny's, his mother, on account of Granny being very unwell. It had been the first time since 2007 that I had been at my granny's. Starting at 6:30 in the morning, the trip required a 6-hour car journey to get a 2 p.m. ferry crossing. After crossing the ferry, we arrive at the house around 4 p.m. and settle in. A dog was present. In the past, when me and my brother would visit, when we were younger, we would always share the same room without exception. After a couple of hours of having settled in and just before dinner, I went into this room thinking it was still my room, as I had not been informed otherwise. My father notices me in this room, but nothing happens. I smell a distinct odor on the bedside table. After having dinner with Granny and my uncle, his brother, around 10 p.m. I go to the same room again, and then a few minutes later, my father comes in, gets really angry and demands to know what I'm doing in his room. So apparently it wasn't my room anymore. I responded I made a mistake. However, he accuses me of deliberately entering this room on purpose, which, to be fair, was true. He starts shouting. My uncle comes to see what the noise was, and then my father tells me to get out and into my room. On Friday morning, I get up and have a bowl of porridge for breakfast around 10 a.m. My father walks into the kitchen, upon seeing me still in my pajamas, remarks with absolute disgust, "Look at you," and angrily tells me that I'm being blocked out of his will, that he's sending me home the next day and is never, ever, seeing me ever again. Throughout all of this, I remain silent, and he further remarks that I'm not deaf. Not long after leaving the bowl of porridge before finishing as I had disliked it, I went out for a walk for about an hour. After returning to the house by 1 p.m. and it was just me and my father along with Granny and the dog, as my uncle had left by this point, around 2 p.m. he asked me to help with the kitchen chores. I entered the kitchen and the bowl of porridge was still sitting on the kitchen table where I had left it. I started to wash some dishes at the kitchen sink while my father sat at the table behind me. For the entire time that I was doing this, for more than half an hour, he proceeded to speak in an extremely angry and aggressive tone. He, first of all, accuses me of outright refusing to eat the porridge. He would then make comments such as I have wasted my life and how he pays taxes for people like me to do nothing all day, and how my mom doesn't do anything to help me tackle the various problems I have. He calls her a cow and says how he offered to support my brother to find a place of his own, but he apparently refused to accept his help. He further mentions how he offered to support me while I was at my primary school, when I was only roughly 6 to 7 years old, but I supposedly refused his help also. Throughout this entire time, I remained silent. When he demanded that I respond to a question or something, he would angrily shout, "Answer me!" or "I need an answer," repeatedly, but I stood my ground. He would then say in an irritated tone, "Please yourself," and I would not give him a response. All of this became so unbearable after a while that I started crying and wailing for it to stop, but he continues regardless. He comes up to the right of me. I felt like hitting him, though I refrained from doing so. He goes out for a few moments after this. There was a weapon to the left of me in the kitchen top, and I was extremely tempted to pick it up and myself with it, just so he would stop. After I finish in the kitchen, he further demands that I give him Mom's mobile number, but I refuse. He says not to worry, I'll get it from my brother. Not long after this, I phoned Mom to tell her about all of this and how upset I was, and for her to tell my brother to not give my father her mobile number. He angrily barged into my room without knocking and demanded to know who I was phoning. I say that I was phoning Mom about how he was upsetting me and giving me hell, and then proceeds to walk out of the room confidently remarking that he doesn't think so. Shortly after this, he comes into my room again and starts speaking to me for nearly half an hour, though in a much calmer tone. He comments that Mom is using me as a piggy in the middle to get back at him, which, for a fact, is completely untrue, and that if I applied for any job, regardless of what job it is and how well qualified I may be for it, I would automatically be rejected on account of my weight. As he described it, "Let's hire someone else." He also claims that he's not against me. Later, he asks if I was going to shave, which I reply that I didn't want at the time to, but he further responds that he wants me to, and to shave every morning, and that is what normal people do. He also tells me not to be afraid of the dog and it won't harm me. A while later, he calls me into the kitchen to start the dishwasher. However, after stating that I did not know how, he responded that he simply wanted to prove a theory in which I pretended to be a genius. As I exit the kitchen and heading towards my room, he follows me out of the kitchen and tells me to go to my room, and also very angrily tells me that I'm never to interfere in his affairs ever again. A while later, he barges into my room again without knocking and sits down beside me. He raises his hand. I say, "Go on, hit me. You've been wanting to do that for the past day." Later, we went out for a walk with the dog, but just as we got out, however, I look at my phone for only about 2 seconds for any app notifications. He noticed this and reacts incredibly angry. Just as we exit through the kitchen door at the back and we go around the house to the front, he proceeds to rant very angrily on about how he does not understand my generation's obsession with mobile phones, and when he was younger, the nearest phone was a few miles away from the house and it served him just fine. While we're out for a walk along a road not far from the house, we stop and turn around to say in a disappointed tone that I promised him that I would shave, despite having said earlier that I did not want to. He then suggests that we both return to the house and that I go on ahead with the dog. He proceeds to speak in the same angry tone as before that this trip wasn't such a waste because, in his words, it shows what I'm really like. He further says that he's sending me home the next day and he's never ever seeing me ever again. Not long after we both return to the house, he has a phone conversation with Mom after getting her number from my brother. Afterwards, I find him in the kitchen speaking to himself in an irritated tone that if Mom thinks he's a bad man, so be it. Shortly after this, he calms down a bit when we have dinner, around 7:30. He says let's forget about sending me home the next day. After having dinner, I settle in the living room away from him, and for the first time, he leaves me alone and things are relatively peaceful for the next couple of hours, before I decide to go to sleep. Story 20. I had to cut off my father and his mom. My father got all the character traits from his mom that made him a real awful father. He would hurt me and my brother, insult us, psychologically torment us. I always got it the worst because I was his favorite and his image, since I looked like him after being born. He personally spent most of my life bringing toxicity and drama to every aspect of it. And when I became an adult, he played off the cruelty as normal, fatherly things. Even joked about it to my face about, "Man, I used to hurt you so bad when you did blank." Finally cut him off when my son was born. I just couldn't bear the thought of my son growing up with an awful role model like him around. And his mother was pretty much the same way. Real old school is the only school type of stuff. But I cut her off because she was dramatic and wasn't part of my life since I was a child. Always skipped over me and my brother for cousins and nieces and nephews. But yeah, just real lousy pieces of trash that I had to cut off to ensure my son's well-being. Story 21. I barely remember. My brain cut out most of my childhood because of trauma. I remember that my dad was cruel and manipulative. He would call me, screaming through the phone, telling me what a horrible kid I was. This was a few times every week. He would shower me with all these gifts that I never asked for, and he would use it against me every time I spoke up about not liking the cruelty. He drank in the car a lot with me in it. He got extremely hammered when we went out to a restaurant and would make me be the designated driver when I was 15. and had my learning permit. One of those times it was in the middle of a serious storm and I had to drive us home. I hydroplaned and nearly had a head-on collision with a pretty big truck, and we nearly got ended. He lied about everyone around him when he was mad at them, and I caught him in those lies multiple times. Some of these lies were things that could get them serious criminal charges and ruin their entire lives. Story 22. I was diagnosed with brain cancer, and as a result, had surgery and radiation. A few days before my radiation, my partner of 6 years dumped me. My already estranged father used this as an opportunity to come care for his daughter. What he actually did was come to town from out of state to leave his wife for another woman. He used my illness to leave his wife for another woman. Additionally, he was prejudiced. He posted hateful memes and photos all over his Facebook, specifically against immigrants. My now husband is an immigrant and came to the U.S. as a child. My father insisted he had a right to see our daughter when she was born. I wanted to remind him she was the daughter of an immigrant, and so when he posted photos about feeding immigrants to alligators as border control, he was talking about his granddaughter's father. He passed away before I could ever waste my breath. I'd say those are the top 2 reasons, but I have a list. Story 23. Not sure if this is the right direction since technically they cut me off, but here goes. I was kicked out at 14. My parents divorced when I was 10. Dad remarried quickly, and while he was somewhat present, he was never really involved and made no attempts to be in my life beyond paying child support. Mom remarried when I was 13. Stepdad was in the Navy. We moved around whenever he was restationed, which meant I had to give up my dog, so I had a chip on my shoulder from the start. Fast forward to when I was 14, my stepdad was your typical schmuck, and I was your typical rebellious teenager. I was intent on being different, just like everyone else. Had long hair, played guitar in rock bands, but since I was short and not a redneck, lived in Florida at the time, I'd get myself roughened on the regular. I started using my money I'd make from teaching guitar lessons and gigs and took karate and kendo classes. Even made some extra dough teaching some of the younger kids classes a few nights a week and would fight in full-contact tournaments every month or so. One night, I came home after karate class. The dojo was only a few miles from home. I rode my bike or skateboard everywhere. I'd been sparring the last half of class and I was exhausted, soaked in sweat and still pretty high in adrenaline. Not 3 steps into the door, my stepdad started his usual routine. Get a haircut. Why do you have your ear pierced? When are you going to get a job? You're a loser, etc. Very original, I know. I chose to ignore him and headed to take a shower. He was offended, apparently, and decided to take off his belt and swing it at me from behind as I was walking away. I didn't think, I just reacted, turned and returned the favor. Mom freaked out and chose him, told me to leave, so I left. Moved in with a keyboard player from one of my bands and didn't talk to my parents again until I invited them to my college graduation. Mom passed away a few years later from cancer, and stepfather cheated on her while she was in hospice, even though she left everything to him. Not much, but did include the house I grew up in originally, and he probably lost it during bankruptcy. I haven't spoken to him since. Been about 25 years now. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.